Superpacks. This is the France 24 debate. We're talking about politics for sale. This after a Florida primary in the United States, which saw record spending. This was just on the Republican side. With us to talk about it, reporter and author of Mona Lisa's Pajamas, Craig Capitas. Also with us from Washington, John Samples of the Cato Institute, Paul Valley of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and Benoît Thiolin of the Le Net Squad, right? La Net Squad. Oh, I got it wrong.
No problem.
La Net. That gender is such an issue in French.
Yeah.
La Net Squad. We were talking about the super PACs of Mitt Romney before the break. And Newt Gingrich, by the way, has his own backers. They include Las Vegas hotel and casino magnate Sheldon Adelson, staunchly pro-Israel, who backed Gingrich's statement that the Palestinians are an invented people. Adelson, along with his wife Miriam, putting $10 million into the pro-Gingrich super PAC, Winning Our Future. And it's not just TV ads. Americans use, by the way, this system called robocalls, where the phone rings at home, and when you answer, you hear a recorded message.
As governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney vetoed a bill paying for kosher food for our seniors in nursing homes. Holocaust survivors, who for the first time were forced to eat non-kosher because Romney thought $5 was too much to pay for our grandparents to eat kosher.
Who listens to that? I mean, you get a phone call
Citizens.
like that. I mean, are you going to listen to that? I don't know
I
anyone.
will not.
I don't know anyone who would listen to that.
Well, I spent part of the last year in Massachusetts. I was there too early to hear that kind of message, but it would have been interesting to get that on my phone.
Before the break, Craig Capitas making the point that all political campaigns are dirty. And you were making the campaign they're dirty here in France as well. Is it really that different since that Supreme Court ruling?
Well, we do have
so far. What do you think of the tone?
Of course, the Supreme Court ruling has apparently lifted really a restriction on a number of donations. We already saw that phenomenon creeping in, especially in long political fights that happened in the last administration. The fight against the passing of the health care reform bill, that was a very polarizing issue in the United States, and of course a huge amount of money was vested into that political fight as well, in ads, in lobbying of senators and congressmen and so on. So obviously there's a trend that's been developing in this matter as well. But it's a very different political culture than what we are accustomed to in Europe. Because here, of course, we have a partisan structure that is very different. In the US, in a way, the political debate is simplified by the bipartisan structure, which basically has transformed the parties into essentially fundraising machines that support a candidate according to, of course, their traditional electorates. Of course, what the Supreme Court decision allows, of course, it adds a lot of money making into the primary debate, and we already saw that the 2008 debate on the Democratic side was a very fierce fight, and a lot of money was spent then, and of course it's now being spent on the other side with even more amount. Of course, in France, if we were to compare, we have a multitude of parties, so obviously just a private funding for according to the different size of different political formations is would be very difficult to translate in many ways. So the public funding here has remained fundamental. The problem being, of course, for the smallest candidates, if they don't make a certain percentage on the first round of the election, they are saddled then with a debt, which they have to reimburse to the public treasury.
And that's
that
the case
happens
for the Green Party nowadays.
Indeed.
Because they are very, very scared not to be able to just pass this 5%.
Yes.
The 5% threshold.
Exactly, and that's why they had to just reframe their budgets below the target that they had before, just because of that, because they are not convinced that they can be reimbursed.
All right, and in France, the rules, again, quite different. The only TV ads you'll see are paid for by the state. They run during the official campaign period. They are subsidized, and campaign contributions limited to 7,500 euros per person. Now, that's not much if you list the expenditures of a campaign. In 1995, Nicolas Sarkozy was the campaign manager for the unsuccessful bid by the then Prime Minister Edouard Balladur. Investigators have since been following a money trail over kickbacks that may or may not have been linked to that campaign, or may not, by the way, have triggered the killing of 11 French engineers in Karachi over unpaid kickbacks. Now, just to give you another example, there's a Dakar-based legal counsel to many an African president, Robert Bourgi, who recently insisted that he never played courier for Sarkozy, but did for many of his predecessors, even once bringing djembes stuffed with cash from Burkina Faso to Jacques Chirac's then foreign minister, Dominique de Villepin. Bourgi, who also pointed the finger at Chirac's socialist predecessor, it's not just one side of the aisle, François Mitterrand, whose son was convicted in the Angola Gate arms kickback scandal. When you hear about our tight rules over on this side of the Atlantic, what's your reaction, John Samples?
Well, let me make a couple of points here. If you listen to what has been said so far, this really isn't at the end of the day about money. You notice the comment about Mr. Adelson and his views about the Palestinian state. You talk about, generally speaking, here in America too, when you talk to people about these commercials and the uses of money, what they are complaining about is not the money in the end. They complain about the money, but the real unhappiness is with the content of the speech. In the United States, under Supreme Court doctrine that is a century old, the content of the speech is no reason for regulating it. It's certainly no reason for prohibiting the speech. That's because in the United States, there is a long tradition coming from our Constitution and our history of being suspicious of state power. And that is, I suspect, the difference. In the United States, if I say to people that the alternative is to have the state control all financing of campaigns, you are talking about the end of freedom of a society. From the United States point of view. And keep in mind also that we're talking about the Congress. The legislature would be doing the regulating here. In the United States, about 8 to 9% of Americans have confidence in the legislature to unleash it, to regulate money, and therefore regulate speech would be something that actually wouldn't be supported by most people in the United States. And I think that's what it comes down to. Should the content of speech be chosen by people who are funding it and the candidates, and with a regard to what they think will work in terms of persuading people to vote for them, or should the state have enormous controls over it, which even in the United States it has had. It's had the power to prohibit. And finally, let me ask a question here. You know, if the state of France or if the state of the United States had the power to prohibit the funding of the camera I'm looking into, or of the people who work at this television station, or the people who work in Paris at the television station, and said no money could be outlaid for these transmissions, would that affect the freedom of speech of anybody that's been talking on these programs? Of course it would. It's not about money, it's about the speech, and it's about the content of the speech, and it always is.
Benoit Thiolin, do you agree that here speech is regulated to a certain degree, since you do go to the state at the end of the day for your subsidies?
No, I mean, ads is regulated. So you can, when you're a politician, you cannot buy ads on TV. The time spent on TV is regulated so that they try to have a balance speeches from different parties. But I mean, the content itself, for sure, is not regulated. So I mean, you can say whatever you want when you're invited on a news or on TV program or everything. So I mean, we don't have to make this confusion. I think that regulating the ads is not regulating the speech and its content.
Well, I would point out, in reaction to what Benoit is saying, and what John Samples is pointing out as well, obviously there is a problem nowadays in public democracy, the space in which the public speech gets expressed. And a lot of it happens to be, well, depends on the sociological or different conditions from one country to another, but the place that television or the internet takes is a very different one. And of course, according to which media you're using, the cost to the candidate is not exactly the same as well. Perhaps the internet, being a civil society based kind of media, happens to be less costly in this matter to diffuse the message.
Let's pick
Established television networks do demand a lot, and obviously, of course, when you're looking at a lot of channels, a lot of prime time air, they do charge for the diffusion of message.
What you're seeing here too is an example of the divide between French perception and U.S. perception. I never thought I would find myself agreeing 100% with the Cato Institute, but John is absolutely correct, and I will defend their right to spend all the money they want and say whatever they want, because you have to do that to preserve the First Amendment. That's how it works in the States. It wouldn't work here, but you have to do that in the States. But there was a Supreme Court justice, and you're going to correct me, Professor, because I'm going to get it wrong. Was it Rehnquist who said, someone said, is this pornography? And he said, I know pornography when I see it. And my mama taught me to know abusive behavior when I see it. And a lot of people in the United States see this application of the First Amendment, which I support 100%, as abusive behavior. And that is the way I think the argument needs to be framed. But if there was a march tomorrow to support this, the super PACs, I think anyone who would be a journalist should be out on the street at the barricades with these guys supporting this.
It's amazing.
But that's how it works in the United States.
Yes. There's no question he's right. There's no question he's right. There's no question he's right, because in the United States, and I imagine in France too, we're talking about, in these companies, we're talking about media corporations. And the ruling in the United States was that corporations could spend money on getting messages out. It's not the case that media has a lot at stake here, because ultimately it too in the United States could come under the regulation of the state. After all, media companies take the corporate form and they spend money on speech. So if money can be regulated, then there's no reason why media corporations can't be too.
But if you bombard viewers with over and over the same ad, like for instance in 2004, there was the negative advertising of that group calling itself Swift Boat Veterans for Truth that did a lot of damage to the John Kerry campaign. If you bombard people with an ad that later turns out to be not entirely true, if not at all, then how do you? Shouldn't there be some kind of regulation on what you can say?
Should we give state officials the power to determine what is truth, and then prior to prior restraint of the speech, before it's spoken, the state official will decide whether it's true or not? I mean, that seems to me to be an anti-liberal state.
I'm agreeing with the Cato Institute twice in one night. The Swift Boat event.
I've earned my salary.
Yeah, indeed you have. Indeed you have. God bless the 18th century Catoist. No, but the point about the Swift Boat situation was this. Okay, the reason that was successful was because of the ignorance of the public. The ignorance of the public to not look behind it, to immediately believe what they would see on the TV and what they would hear, that they believed this tub thumping. To believe whole cloth, which you hear in these ads, is dangerous. You have to look behind the curtain. It goes back to the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Well, you have to pay attention to that man behind the curtain.
I would just add that I think there is a big difference between the situation in 2004. Internet and the social media were not as strong as they are now. And I think that probably a way not to regulate, but to balance this phenomenon is just the power of the citizen
let me
and
ask
the
you
social
about
media.
That. Let me ask you about that point, Benoît Tirlin. No TV ads in France.
No.
But is the web a way of partially bypassing that kind of exposure? Nicolas Sarkozy is not yet a declared candidate in France, but there's nothing to regulate the ad that, for instance, his conservative UMP party put out a few days ago, linking him to General de Gaulle and to past presidents of France. This web ad that's running, do you get the sense with web ads like this one that it's sort of the beginning of the end for TV advertising?
No, I don't think so, but I mean, the big difference is the audience. when you put a video on YouTube, I mean, you have absolutely no warranty that a lot of people is going to watch it, which is the difference with the TV. What will make the audience on the internet is the viral phenomenon, the fact that people are going to share it on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. So, I mean, we have, in fact, it's very equal. I mean, everybody has the same power. They can publish a video on the internet, and then if they have supporters, it will be spread out a lot. So it's really a difference between with the TV.
John Samples, a question before we go about the possible backlash of all the negative advertising. We've seen polls suggesting that Mitt Romney's stance with independence has dropped considerably, that his negative approval ratings have climbed from 22% in December to 42%, according to one recent poll. Do you think that negative ads will work in the end?
Well, let's get this in perspective here at the end, which is last night in the exit polls, just about 30% of Florida voters reported that they had been affected by the ads. So that means 70% of them reported from their point of view that the ads had little effect on their choice. Do I think if Mr. Gingrich continues to his campaign and the other candidates and is critical of Mr. Romney, I think the crucial point is the criticism credible? Does it ring home with the viewers? Let's end on a point of commonality. Both France and the United States are the heirs to two different traditions of Republican government. And what does Republican government require? It requires voters who participate, who are thoughtful and critical. And we can both at least agree to that, I think. And that's what, in the free speech tradition in America, we ultimately rely on. It's the voter that makes the decision, not the government.
All right, and that'll be the final word. John Samples, thank you for joining us from Washington. I want to thank Paul Vallée, I want to thank Craig Kopitas, and I want to thank Benoît Thiolin for joining us. And thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Now, speaking of freedom of speech, we're going to be hearing a lot about how much Facebook is worth in a moment. Marcus Carlson has business.
Watch France 24 live and free on your mobile phone. Anywhere in the world, on almost any cell phone, whatever your provider. Watch France 24 live and in 3 languages. France 24 on your mobile phone. Just visit our website, france24.com, and click on mobile. Select your phone brand, enter your phone number, and you'll receive a free SMS telling you how to install our player. You can watch France 24 live and get the latest world news for free on your mobile.
In France, more and more people are sliding into poverty. These nouveaux poor are students, single parents, casual workers, and the elderly. Juliette, Lauriane and Régis are like millions of French people getting by, living just above the poverty line. At any moment, they risk slipping below it. But they're determined not to let that happen. A documentary on France's nouveau poor, Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Paris time, on France 24.